Ryan Banta, welcome to the Soccer Queens podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited. It's been a long time coming, and I'm ready to offer the audience ideas, suggestions, and things to ponder.
This is going to be really fun, and I love talking to professionals in the track world because in the soccer world, speed development is one big collective miss or fail. And I've just been trying my best to read as much from the track community as I can. And you got your book on your screen. I have your book here, Sprinter's Compendium. It's like the speed Bible. And I always refer back to it for my sessions. And it's really helped me program mechanics and different speed and acceleration drills. So we'll get into that today. But I want you to give a background on just your wealth of work with some of the best track athletes and what you're currently doing today.
Yeah, so I got my start in 2002 as a volunteer coach, and then I got the opportunity to be a head coach way sooner than I probably deserved to be in 2003. So we just celebrated 20 years of me being a head coach. And we ended up finishing third this year in the state of Missouri in the state championships as a team. We won our conference meet, our district meet, our sectional meet. We had a young lady set two state records, and she individually won four state championships, which has never been done by a female athlete in the state history of Missouri ever. This is pretty exciting. And, we finished in the top five, 8 times since 2008. So we've had a really successful program with a lot of kids doing a lot of great and wonderful things. I've had opportunities to work with kids who eventually became, Division One All-Americans, an Olympian, national record holders, American record holders, and all of that. So I feel very blessed to have been at the intersection of a lot of people's abilities and talents, and anything I could do to be a net positive for them. I'm overjoyed to have that responsibility and the gift that I've been given to help, shepherd that talent. And then a while back, in 2012, I was writing on a bunch of different websites, just kind of throwing it out into the ether, not knowing if anybody was even paying attention or listening. And I got to the Olympic Training Center. I was doing a little emerging elite coaches program out there, and people actually started referencing an article that I had written and didn't know that that was actually me. And at that point, I was excited, but I was also worried. I was like, oh, I didn't know anyone was listening or reading this stuff. But man, opportunity here to fill a void or to fill a gap for other coaches so that they don't have to make the same mistakes that maybe I made as a coach through my, hard knocks and in learning the difficult way and not necessarily always doing it the best, and so this way to cut down on those extremely bad mistakes, and nothing like criminal or anything like that. But, I think you've talked to Tony on a couple occasions and trying to figure out the proper, dosage of volume or the type of training and recruiting the right kids into your program from your hallways and getting the right assistant coaches and having the right philosophy on the exact why that I'm doing what I'm doing. And that kind of led to the genesis of the book. And I then went out, because of people that I had connected with through all of these things that I've been a part of for my thirst of knowledge, and found a lot of coaches that I really respected and found really valuable. And the great thing about the track and field world, and I don't know that this is necessarily the case in soccer, but is that coaches in track and field are willing to share because everyone can benefit from the ceiling and the floor being raised in performance. Like if you have a 9-lane race, everybody in that race could have something positive happen. They can execute something they've never done before. They can run a school record, a PR, qualify for a meet, whatever it is. And I think that allows track and field coaches to be more willing to share. And as you mentioned, our sport is all about speed and, running fast, jumping far, jumping high, throwing far. So it's the rudimentary skills that pretty much every other sport needs. And so I feel like we have a lot of value to add to other sports like soccer and rugby and basketball, sports where you have to be athletic and fit.
So if there's anyone you guys need to listen to on speed development, it is Ryan. I mean, his experience is absolutely incredible. But, I'm sure there's some people asking, especially in the soccer community, for those listening, well, is soccer speed training, shouldn't it be specific? Or why should soccer players train like athletes or very similar to track athletes?
So great question. One of the biggest things in soccer that's infuriating to me, and there's a lot of things, but the big thing is how often players get injured. If you look at like the elite Premier Leagues in Europe, hamstring injuries are almost going to show up to about a quarter of the players in those programs. A quarter. And you think about all of the missed amount of time that not having your best 11 guys or gals on the pitch at the same time because someone is always dealing with an injury. And it might not be like a grade 3 hamstring tear, but something that is disrupting their ability to practice, their ability to play, the ability to develop a rhythm and a partnership with the other guys that are on and gals that are on the field with you at the same time. And if you look at it, a lot of times those injuries show up in bonus time, extra time, or at the very end of the game. And then of course, what would a lot of people say that are volume based people? Well, then we just need to run a lot to get in shape so we don't get hurt. That's not true. The reality is that what ends up happening with that fatigue is you have a breakdown in mechanics that are already really sloppy. And when you're playing long passes up to the forward or whatever in soccer, there's a lot of times where now you're running not only with fatigue, not only with bad mechanics, but now you're also putting your body in an overflow situation where the muscles and the firing patterns are moving oddly. Then that's a recipe for disaster. And for me, it's like the better movers that anybody becomes at half speed, full speed, acceleration, maximum velocity, which is all required in the game of soccer, the better off that you're going to build bulletproof athletes. And that track and field and mechanics and learning how to run well at full speed is really important because a lot of people, you know, will highlight, well, we've gotten really faster in our flying 10 or flying 20. Great. That's great. We want to move the ceiling of absolute speed up. But also, how does it look? You can run really fast a couple of times and absolutely blow the engine out. Like if you look at like dragster racing or, Fast and the Furious movie series, they're always hitting the nitrous, and they're blasting the car down the track and it has this rapid acceleration. Well, I look at that as like if you're improving absolute speed like that, but you're not doing it with the other part of the equation, which is improved mechanics, you're increasing the chance of danger, dangerous situations where, of course, an athlete is going to tear a muscle, pull a hip, have a hamstring strain. And these are things that I think coaches who aren't neck deep in the world of speed like we are don't quite understand the value and importance of teaching those things and having something set aside every day in practice for the athletes to work on and improve that skill of moving fast.
So let's dive into that more on the mechanics front. I have a couple questions with that. So is there such thing as perfect sprint mechanics? Or are there just like some big rock things we should be just really aiming for? And what are those?
Dan Path told me a long time ago that it's very dangerous to seek perfection because perfection is very fragile. It requires everything working absolutely perfectly at all times. Well, in a game like soccer, a game like football, there is not that perfection. So instead of working towards perfection, I always talk about you want a robust athlete, an athlete that can handle less than perfect conditions and still be successful, being able to adapt and move to the situation. So when we look at what would be perfect mechanics, well, definitely one of the biggest things we see is where posture plays a role. Are their hips turned down? Are their hips turned back excessively? Do we see a lot of backside action? So where we see the foot spinning kind of behind the butt instead of in front of the belly button and down. And if you see that in excess, we're not getting, first of all, we're not covering ground. We're spending a lot of time of our rotationary ability behind us. So we're actually cheating ourselves out of feet of distance on every stride that we have. And in addition, the body's not meant to take the ground, deal with the ground, push over the center of mass on the foot in that position, and then propel the body forward. And so when we're doing that, then we're increasing the chance of injury as well, because the body's, elastic properties and all the connective tissue and everything is being asked to do the work out of balance. So what I like to see at full speed is a nice upright body position once we're done accelerating, having good front side mechanics, not excessive backside, and hips that are in what I would call a neutral position where they don't feel like they're folded down or they're pointing up excessively. And why is that? Because the anterior part of the body, the front side of the body, and the posterior side of the body does half the work. So if you're not using one side and the other side's getting excessive work, again, it's a recipe for disaster, but it's also limiting the amorphic properties of that individual athlete to take advantage of themselves. And that's where it gets into that, well, what's perfect? Well, there are some rocks that we need to see. Good front side mechanics, not excessive backside, neutral hips, nice upright position. But in soccer, you can't do that all the time because you're adjusting to movements, you're running laterally, you're running at angles and all that. In addition, in the sport of soccer and football and sports like that, athletes have a lot of different sizes. So while we want to see those basic tenets of good front side, not excessive backside, and neutral hips, it's always going to look a little different for the athlete who you may have. I mean, you've got somebody who's got excessively long legs, or an athlete that's a little bit more built up and kind of looks endomorphic as opposed to ectomorphic. Well, that's going to change what it's going to look like. It doesn't mean it's wrong, but as a coach, then you got to go, okay, for this particular person, does that seem to fit what they need and how they should look? And as you do this stuff, you'll start to figure that out. Because some people, as you know, coach, is hips are not necessarily constructed the same way. So when we ask certain things, you have to realize, well, like that joint just is never going to be able to do that. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to then still fit a lot of the basic tenets of good front side mechanics, not landing on the back of our heel, getting to the midfoot, having neutral hips as best we can, not having excessive side to side action when we're running straight down the field. These are things that need to be worked on.
It's amazing what just fixing that posture does for sprinting form. And are there any cues you give your athletes to really open up that posture and make sure they're being as upright as they can, whether it's in like mechanics drills or running longer sprints?
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest thing first of all, when we line everybody up on the track, we get on a line, we don't get in a lane, so that when we're doing all these drills, we want to make sure that we're not seeing excessive right to left action, and we put them on a line instead of the lane because aim small, miss small. Then we always talk about hips up, shoulders up, ankles up. And shoulders up, we don't want them up top tight. So we just want that chest up, hips up, ankles up, and to give them in this nice upright body position. Because one of the things we have to deal with as a coach in our modern context is that people are hunched over computers all day long. They're looking at their phone, and if they have a huge head like I have, a head the size of a cannonball, and I'm leaning over looking at my phone, you're rolling over that back for hours and hours a day. And if you think about how much time they spend on screen time, that's also a guaranteed time with bad posture. So we spend a lot of time with chest up, hips up, ankles up, and then we roll into the drill. So you'll literally see all my athletes as they step to the front of the row on the line. You literally see them rise up from their ankles, chest up, hips up, and then we go into that. The other thing is if we see their hips are wonky one way or another, we always talk about sucking in the gut and tucking in the glutes. So we talk about sucking and tucking. And what we always tell our kids is we don't want them to have a duck butt. And what that looks like is the athlete is running in a chair. They're running upright, but they seem to still not be upright. They seem to be running as if they had a chair underneath them and they're spinning on a rolling chair as they move down the track. So we want to be chest up, hips up, ankles up, suck and tuck, and then we don't want that excessive crossover. And that helps me too if I have them on a line, because that line becomes a landmark for me to see how much they're twisting through that. The other thing that we do to help posture is, well, and first of all, let me back up for you too. We always do our technical running stuff at the beginning of practice, because that central nervous system needs to be the freshest to learn. So when we do our drills and we do our warm up, for me as a track and field coach, that's where I do my most coaching, because, and I'm being very critical about the details, because if I don't see those things, they're going to get hardwired incorrectly. And whatever you do as an athlete, and if you're trying to make a biomotor pattern, a firing pattern change, it's going to take 500 hours, give or take, to fix that process. Well, that's a lot of work. And so, whatever you're doing, you want to make sure that you're getting the best bang for your buck. So, from that central nervous system, we want that on the front end of practice where the athlete is the freshest so we can make those minor corrections. Okay. The other stuff that we do to fix posture issues and things like that is we'll take away their arms. So Franz Bosch, a European coach, has done a lot of work with this where he'll put his athletes' hands out in front of them, straight above them, on the temples. Tony does like the pistol position, and we do a bunch of different hand positions. And what that does is, again, it shifts the weight of the athlete, changes the center of mass just slightly enough that now the athlete has to, again, relearn how to run, move, jump in these positions without the help of the hands or the arms. And I found that that really helps fix some of that excessive over rotation. Because if you look at the body, the upper body and the lower body are counter rotating themselves as you're sprinting down the track to keep you straight, to keep you moving in the direction you want to go as efficiently as possible. But people learn bad habits, and the arms are kind of like the training wheels, if you will, to the body if you were on a bicycle as a little kid. You take those training wheels away, you really find out some things about your athletes. Some athletes have excessively weak lumbar strength or lower core. They really needed those arms to keep themselves in balance. And so that little minor tweak to a drill forces the athlete to really learn how to move in absence of that assistance from the arms. The other thing we'll do if I'm dealing with a field sport athlete, and we do this in track practice too, is that I'll force these drills on turns. So if you've got a big center field circle or a lacrosse circle or something on your field that has a nice followable arc, we will force our athletes to then still do these drills and the mechanics work while we're on a curve, on a swivel, on a turn line. And we try to implement that stimulus at different points in the season. Let's say every 3 to 6 weeks, we'll change it up where we throw this stuff in to force the athlete to constantly adjust and never get docile and plateau neurologically. And that forces the athlete to continue to learn. It also keeps practice interesting, and it also keeps the athlete in a state where they're having to have what I would call positive attention, not paralysis by analysis, but just enough focus that you're getting learning done.
Those are really great tips, and I love that you mentioned bang for buck movements for athletes, and I see this a lot in the soccer community, this obsession with ladder drills and the agility rings, and they're still in that slouched over position that they're always spending time in. So, do you wanna just, like, get into why that's not ideal when we really want to develop speed for soccer players?
So the big thing is those kind of drills and stuff make you feel like you're doing something, but you're not going anywhere. I've seen a lot of people who can do the cha-cha and shake and wiggle and do all that kind of stuff. And that's great for the club. That's great for homecoming, maybe great for prom when you're trying to show off fancy footwork. But that isn't going to help you beat Usain Bolt. That isn't going to help you to create space on Messi, who might not be as big or as fast or as strong as you. And that's the one way you might be able to get an advantage over that guy. And so I always look at it, and again, my soccer background is much more limited than my American football background or basketball or track and field, where I've spent a lot of my time either as an athlete or as a coach or whatever. And what I find it is to be more like this idea of compression and extension. So it's nice to do those things. It's nice to have footwork drills. It's nice to be able to move the ball around. It's nice to be able to do that. But that's different than us trying to raise the floor of your absolute speed. So if you're wanting to raise the floor of absolute speed, then you got to go do that task at its most maximum frequently because it's a central nervous thing. So every, 48 to 72 hours, something maximal should be happening. But also, the sport of soccer requires you to not run at max speed, but be at a relatively quick clip for extended periods of time. So that idea of, hey, we want to be really good at a flying 10, flying 20 with good mechanics, as I talked about earlier. Yes. Do we want to have a special session to improve our mechanics? Yes. Does that have to happen every day? No. But it should show up every 48 to 72 hours. Those things should be built around the other technical things that you have to do, footwork, timing, plays, short-sighted games, right? Things like that that have to happen in soccer as well. So in soccer, you have a short-sighted game. We spend a lot of time of that because of the culture of futsal and putting touch on the ball repetitively, right? Repeatedly, wanting that over and over and over again. So we increase the number of touches to improve that skill set. That's great. But then also you need to be playing with an extension where you're playing on a full side because that's how the game is played. That's the sport. And the athletes need to know how to deal with that, where they need to know how to put a touch on the ball where it's 30 yards down the field. You need to know how to do that too. It's the same thing for running. You have to have timing where you're doing some agility work, doing some short side speed, but that needs to be balanced with actual sprinting and then actual longer intervals as well, which I am a believer in. I don't think as a football player or soccer player that you need to be running repeat 800s, 600s, 400s, but you may need to see some 150s. You may need to see some 200s, and those don't necessarily need to be short. Can they be hundreds on the minute? Sure, you could do that, if you're doing some tempo work. But should you be doing tempo work all the time? No. But should it show up every 48 to 72 hours if you're training 6 days a week and playing as well? Probably. And that's the idea of that a lot of people go so hard because we're so built to be binary in our thinking, this or this. Instead, it's this, and this at a particular time. So it's not like when people are like, well, I want to get faster. Okay, well, that's the what. That's easy to know. The how is the challenge, and how do you organize it? And so, as coaches, we need to think about, well, what fits in my practice sessions? When can I honor this? And when can I make sure this is going to happen so my athlete can get better under fatigue, where they're tired and they can still run with good mechanics? My athlete can get better overall at their freshest technically so that their posture can be improved. The athlete can get faster maximally when they need the central nervous system at their best. And so, as a coach, figure out where that matches up in your practice and put it there, and then build around that all of the other truly soccer related touch strategy and components that you need to be a good player.
Let's shift gears to the young ones because the age group ages 8 to 12 is what I get asked about the most in terms of speed development. And there's a lot out there on this age group. So, what have you done with this age group in terms of developing speed?
So, long time ago, Lauren Seagrave, who is a very famous track and field coach, worked with Dan Path and some of the other people. So it's like the mentor of my mentors kind of thing. He talked about that there are these ages of opportunity where if an athlete is not moving fast, they will miss out on the central nervous system really developing that ability to move fast. So, one of the things that we have in our bodies is this idea of, or the idea, it's a substance called myelin. And myelin wraps around our nerve endings and it kind of makes our nerves, it helps us fire more correctly, strongly, and faster. So you've got strength, speed, and correct timing with this myelin as it wraps around each one of these neurons. And as that goes along, it starts to look like a sausage, if you will. It's more myelin wraps around it. So young people body is going to pick up on the things that you stimulate the body with, specifically between this age of 8 and 12. It's really important. So instead of like spending a ton of time going out and running really, really long, you should be spending a lot of time with young people running really, really fast. And the other thing you have to remember is an 8 to 12-year-old, especially like boys, because they don't hit puberty until their late teens, and they're not even have a fully formed brain until their mid 20s, which is one of the reasons why relationships tend to not work out. You're like, why is this guy such a problem? So because he's not actually a fully formed human for another 5 years, ladies. So just I've got two daughters, so now the concepts and things I worry about. But anyway, okay. So this speed component is something that needs to be stimulated, but you have to remember too, like where, hey, I can, as a track coach, and being the 400 guy that I am, the 400 and 800 guru, if you will, I also realize like a 400-meter dash for an 8-year-old, that's an endurance event. It's not a speed event because you think about amorphically how tiny that kid is. So you don't need to worry about, oh, we got to get in shape for soccer for 8 and 12-year-olds. No, make soccer and any field sport fun and make speed fun, right? So that can be games of tag. That can be fun relays with soccer balls doing fun drills back and forth. That can be all sorts of contests. Gamify everything. And you're going to get so much more out of those kids that's going to be beneficial for their actual speed, but also beneficial for them in general. And the other thing is people are always worried about like, oh, well, we're not going to play well for the in the second half, and our kids aren't going to be in great shape. If you're playing a lot of soccer, they're already doing a lot of running. If you look at like a rugby player, a guy who plays, one of the interior positions in rugby, those guys still run miles and miles and miles when they're playing rugby. So the natural inclination is, well, then let's go run miles and miles and miles. It's different. It's a different thing. You're not asking the athlete to run 100 yards, then walk 100 yards, run 100 yards, and walk 100 yards, which is what these guys are doing in rugby to a degree. You're thinking, oh, I'm just going to go on a 5-mile road run. Well, that's terrible for a guy who weighs 250 pounds. It's also terrible for little kids who don't need that. And you're actually wiring them. The body has this biological opportunity to actually overclock their central nervous system. And then what's cool about that, and people don't understand, is that if you do that for the central nervous system, just like I told you, it takes 500 hours of something else to undo it, which means you've now created a fairly permanent, long lasting, perennial change for that athlete that they will have for the rest of their life. And that's where we get into this concept of like people talk about old man strength. Old man strength is a thing that basically it's from knowing how to do the thing, not being afraid of it, and knowing the proper technique in order to do it. The only reason why old man strength doesn't be usually called old man speed is because there's other things we've done to ourselves that slow us down, whether it's a pickup of an injury, gating of weight, lack of sleep, having way more things on your mind. That's where the older athletes aren't as fast or as good. But that strength has always been there. That ability to squeeze, to move, to fire is still there. It's always there. Like you think about like boxing, for example. I know this is way off the reservation kind of conversation here, but what's the last thing to leave a heavyweight boxer? Their knockout punch. They might not be able to do it 1,000 times, but they could still do it one time. And so if you're not doing those things at the developmental level, you're actually taking away that kid's ability to have success, not only in soccer, but any other sports pursuit outside of golf. for the rest of their life. And so we don't want to do that. One of the things I remember I did, and this is completely not something my parents had me do or any coach had me do. I had a friend who lived 4 houses up the street. He was my best friend and my only friend when I was in elementary school. And I had a set of bushes in front of my house, and he lived 4 houses away. And for whatever reason, when I was a little kid in elementary school and in middle school, when I called him up to ask if I could come over to play, and he always said yes, which was awesome. I loved this guy to the end of the world. What a good friend. I would sprint as fast as I could to this guy's house. As fast as I could. I tried to get to the house before he could hang up the phone and answer the door. Now, I was actually really fast as a kid. So there were times where I thought I actually did this. I did not know that he was actually just sitting in the living room watching me basically spazzily run all the way down 4 houses. But what was I doing every day as a kid? I was sprinting all out, feeling the rush of that wind go by your head, which changes. That sound changes when you get to that speed. And I'm running as fast as I can. I was overclocking my body daily. And lo and behold, I was extremely fast as a kid in comparison to anybody else in my neighborhood, more so than my dad or my mom or anybody else in my family was. So the genetics were there, but the stimulus was different, and I was doing it over and over and over as a kid. Now that's a equation 1/1, but the truth is that that's what we should be doing for all kids, doing something that gets them to move fast, them having fun with it, them enjoying it, and they still have that today. They'll have it as an older person because that's so hardwired. But if you program the computer of the body to go slow, you'll get really good at going slow for the rest of your life. And naturally, as humans, our body wants to go that direction anyway over time. So don't speed up the process of slowing us down. Let's speed up the process of speeding us up and then raising that ceiling so that when we do slow down, it takes a really long time to fall from that absolute ceiling.
I love it. So putting an 8 to 12-year-old through light to moderate ladder work as opposed to sprinting as fast as possible is not the best idea, everyone. And I love that you mentioned fun. I have seen a lot in my years of coaching, like the kids who are pushed with too much of that like overcoaching and structure with like sprint mechanics, they just get really burned out from training and they start to show up with less of a joy. And I really think that fun is just such an important piece to hammer home. And you mentioned races or tag. And I love that you said tag because I don't think people think about that like reactive component of speed too, especially for soccer players. Do you want to just get into that more as far as like the vision and field scanning?
Yeah, so if you look at some of the best players in the world, one of the things they did, I think it was on Sports Science a long time ago, and they had Ronaldo, and they had the glasses over the athlete that would pick up where the eyeballs were going. And the more novice the soccer player was, the more they were spending time looking at their feet instead of looking up and reacting to the actual things that matter. When you're spending so much time worrying about what you're doing, you can't worry about what other people are doing. So in a game like tag, I mean, obviously you could have the ball there, you could put flags on them, and they automatically lose the ball if they get touched, and all this kind of stuff. You can change it up where it changes the stimulus, which keeps it interesting for young people. It forces them to pay attention more to another thing that they probably didn't have to pay attention to at a soccer game. It also forces them to be more mobile, right? Where they can't just bully their way in. You got these big, huge guys that are just, leaning and leaning and leaning, which is a great skill to have in soccer to keep somebody off of you, but also separation and space is really good too. And so having those type of games keeps that fun, keeps that interesting, and forces that reaction and response. And those type of things where like you do mirror drills, like I'm doing this and you got to do this, and figuring out a way to do it where you can have contests. So you do it like a tournament. So that way you never have a situation where an athlete's getting punished for not being great, but you're rewarding them for being great instead. And so having those type of ideas. So like in my program, if I feel like my athletes are getting docile or they're getting bored or they're not doing the things I would want them to do, one of the things I try to do is figure out a way, okay, today I'm giving out an interval card. So whoever has the best execution of these drills today, whoever does the best workout today, whoever wins this contest, like a 30-meter block start tournament, I'm giving out an interval card. You can do the same thing with a game of tag, short-sided games, futsal, or whatever, and have that response. Mirror games, mirror drills, doing this, relays, and fun things you can do in soccer as well. That may seem like totally unrelated to soccer, but they're very related to reaction, agility, and speed. And so you can build team through that while at the same time getting a lot of bang for your buck, as we mentioned earlier, and forcing these people. Because, like, when people are doing agility drills on an agility ladder without a ball and they're not responding to anybody, I don't find a lot of value in that. Like, that's not the game. And to me, it's like there's nothing that I can pull from that that makes that better. And certainly, even if you want an athlete to do that, that's something they probably could do at home, where you can work on that. It's low impact, it's not going to wear the kid out, you know. But I want to see things where, hey, if we're working as a group, there should be value in the group. So how can we gamify it? How can we speed it up? How can we make it fun? How can we force the athletes to react to something, to change something, and to compete, to build those juices, while at the same time you're still getting fitness, you're still getting an aerobic component from that work. It's not like the gas tanks in the body turn on and off. They're all going at the same time. And so those are things for like young people in soccer that in all team sports we should figure out ways to do and make fun. Like, so like in cross country, we'll do like, the egg on the spoon run, or we'll do like on a hot summer day, we'll do the buckets with the and a line on the bucket, and we've got sponges, and the kids got to squeeze, get the sponge and get water in the sponge and run to the bucket and do that. And they'll do all sorts of stuff, where you can do some fun things that, hey, the athletes are running, they're moving fast, but they don't even know that they're moving fast. Like ultimate frisbee is great. It's awesome. Probably not something that soccer people are going to do a lot, but again, it's a change of pace and something that can get the athletes motivated, get a little extra out of them, which, believe it or not, will be aerobic as well and fitness as well. And we can force those athletes to do things they wouldn't do without that stimulus.
There's just so many benefits to small-sided games and making it fun and just getting a great speed effect or even just heart rate effect, and I think when parents watch, like, the fun sessions, they're like, "Well, my kid's not working hard or getting anything out of it," but actually those fun games, they're working the hardest, so it's really interesting.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I had to learn. Again, dumb coaches my first couple of years, oh, we're going to have an active recovery day and we're going to go play tag. We're going to go play kickball. We're going to go play ultimate frisbee. And lo and behold, the next day, every one of my athletes are trashed, because they're using muscles they don't normally use. They're giving an effort in a competitive way. And people are like, well, I don't want to do that on a day. I got to work hard. We got to do this. We got to get our sessions in. We got to get our gassers in. We got to do that. It's like, hey, instead of doing gassers, guess what? A freaking tournament of ultimate frisbee is going to get way more out of it, or a game of
Capture the
flipping
flag.
football. Yeah, capture the flag. Oh my God. I mean,
Great
my kids
game.
are toast. It's amazing. It's
Yeah.
amazing. And what does that do? It forces agility. And it doesn't have a ball, but that's okay. You want to have that too, because they're going to have that in futsal. They're going to have that in a short-sided game, but then take the ball away and play capture the flag. And oh my gosh, those kids will be so gassed and moving so fast. And that's one of the things we do too, especially like in cross country. We'll divide our team up into four and we'll have a little mini tournament. And then again, the award is like, giving them out of an interval or a mile or a weight room routine, and then they cash in that card. And what's wild is you'll be amazed at how hard they work to get that, or not even to get it, but just to take the chance at getting it, versus trying to do that with a different type of, all right, hey, we're going to play 3-on-3 short side, whatever. And you might not get the same output from them because they're like, yeah, I've done that before. That's not fun. That's the usual thing. So figuring out a way that you can get the same thing done with something slightly different, but also knowing like, don't ever put that in front of a competition 24 hours in front, like make sure you've figured out like, okay, this is how trashed these kids are going to be the next day, or they're fatigued or tired, and take note of that, so that you're not making, because then what will happen is you'll be like, oh, well, that screwed everything up. I'm never going to do that again. No, 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 no. It's when you did it, not what you did, that's the problem, and how you did it, right? It's the how and the when instead of the what. So, hey, maybe you do that on a Tuesday if you have a game on a Friday, and you still get the benefits and all that awesome stuff, and the kids look forward to it, but you don't miss out on all the other things you need to do. And you're not going to miss out on being competitive in the game because now the athletes can't move or run.
I do want to touch on the strength piece to speed development if you have some time. I know we've gone a little bit longer, but I'm just learning a lot and loving the conversation. But what role does strength training play in speed development?
So strength training is one of those things that's like low hanging fruit. So early on, strength training in its traditional sense is very, very valuable. Most people you come across are underpowered. They don't have a lot of strength. And one of the things that, like, one of my contemporaries that, he doesn't focus as much on the weight room because it's like, well, you add this much weight and you add this much poundage, it's then you got to do this much more speed to overcome it. And I'm like, no, you got it all wrong. Because first of all, a lot of strength training is neurological. All right. So what we're trying to do is not only increase the size of the muscle through hypertrophy, but what we're trying to do is increase the ability of the body to coordinate by getting as many motor units involved in action so that you can create a summation of forces from your body all at the right time to be very powerful and to be very explosive. So strength is very important. And to that degree, like, so that I'm owning it, like if you would get the Sprinter's Compendium, that's one of the biggest chapters, because my dad back in the day was the police Olympic champion in powerlifting. So weight training is very important in my family. But again, it's not the what, hey, everybody's got to get stronger, duh. It's how you do that. So again, one of the things that you want to make sure you're doing is rotating the emphases of what you're doing in the weight room. So there is going to probably be a component where you're doing more general strength, which I call posture buttressing. There's going to be a component where you're probably going to increase the size of the tires. So there is going to be some hypertrophy. And what does hypertrophy also do? That type of training, okay, hey, you don't want them to get way bigger and slower. Totally get it. But they're not going to get way bigger and slower if you're only doing it for 3 to 6 weeks in a phase. And then you pull that phase out, and then you do a different type of lifting emphasis. Even though the lifts might not be that different, it's how you're lifting them that becomes different, right? So now we go to a maximal strength routine, which is not going to put on a bunch of pounds on you, but put a bunch of pounds on the bar. And then you have a proprioceptive phase where now they're having to deal with lifting on one leg, or single leg squats, or more balance orientated lifting. Then you have, what I call fast as possible lifting. Other people call velocity based training. Then you have a phase of that. And so then that builds to what you're wanting anyway, which is that neurological coordination and the summation of forces to create power. And what a lot of people don't get is they'll mess that up. Like, I have a young lady right now who's not going to be named, but she went to college and she's gained a bunch of weight in the weight room. And so the strength and conditioning people are really excited because they're pushing that number up. But the problem is, as you push that number up, you're overemphasizing that and probably de-emphasizing the actual sport itself, which is speed. And so there's always this interplay between those types of things that you have to be very cognizant of. So for me, all my athletes lift. My cross country athletes lift. And what did we do yesterday? We did the jerk, we did a deadlift, we did a bench press, and we squatted. And then we did hamstring roll unders and quad roll unders as well. And then they do core at home because they can do core at home. And those kids are so committed that they'll do it. I'm not worried about that. I want to do the stuff that they can't do at home and they need me for. Like, I don't want a kid squatting at home without me watching, especially some spindly little cross country kid who's never done this before. I want my eyes on that. And we spend a lot of time. So, like in the winter, for us, we lift every day in every session that we meet. Now, we meet 4 times. So they have 3 times a week they're not lifting, and 4 times they are. And the reason why we do that in the winter is because I can't guarantee that the conditions are going to be great. So even though my athletes might be a little too gunned up, to use a weightlifting term, look a little too big at the beginning of track season, well, then in the track season, the weather gets better. We're only going to be lifting 2 to 3 times a week. So all of a sudden, that weight room becomes less of an emphasis. So I may lose out of a little bit of speed at the beginning of the track season, but then that's going to become the emphasis for 3.5 months, and then maybe all the way through the summer as well. And so for soccer players, they need to be stronger because, again, if you have an overflow moment and you're not strong and you're not coordinated, then you're going to get hurt. But the stronger you are, the more you are likely to survive an awkward body movement situation and get through it without tearing the tissue or getting the nervous system to grab and go, oh crap, I'm not used to this. What's that? And then you've got a cramp that can turn into a strain or a muscle pull if it's not dealt with. And that's where people get this all wrong because, first of all, you can make a person more flexible day to day. You can make them more enduring week to week. You can make them stronger month to month, and you can make them faster year to year. And then you make them grittier decade to decade. So by the time you're actually gritty, everything else has been worn out and used up, and you're a wily old, devious veteran, but you don't have the other things anymore. But the thing that people look at, they're like, well, I can chase numbers in the weight room and I can justify what I'm doing because I could see the benefit. I could see that. And then where speed becomes a little bit tougher because unless they're wearing a GPS system and we're looking at kilometers per hour as they're running, unless we're testing fly 20s or fly 30s, you actually probably don't know if they've actually gotten faster as a soccer player, which is the reason why you should do that. So you actually do know they've gotten faster. And because your eyes, what you might see on the field, might not play out what's actually happening. And you need to know that you're actually making those improvements because the reality is all of those things are important. They're very important, but speed is the most important. So when you're in the weight room, you got to make sure that you're rotating things and not spending too long in one spot to overemphasize something because, again, they're going to plateau, then they're going to have detraining, and then they're going to get hurt, or they're going to get bored. They're not going to take it as seriously. And that's one of the things, like in the sport of football, the weight room really matters and conditioning really sucks. And so the athletes try to do everything they can to skirt, to get out of the conditioning part, and then they'll spend hours in the weight room. Track and field people, they'll do everything they can on the track and in the pit and in the ring, and then in the weight room they sneak out. They get through 1 or 2 exercises and they try to leave. And so as coaches, we need to understand the athlete and where they're at, what they're trying to do. But also we need to understand the mental part of it, that they need to have certain breaks and changes in routine. We also need to understand that our desire to show instant improvement to make our position actually mean something could be to the detriment of that athlete, and that's where, like, strength and conditioning coaches, it's funny, it should be speed and strength because speed probably is more important than strength in most situations, unless you're an offense or defensive lineman. And I could make arguments for that as well. And, at the end of the day, the conditioning part is probably like a lowercase c, and then the strength part is a huge uppercase letter that just dwarfs the c. And as coaches, we got to figure out that nice balance. And I always worry, and I know I'm going on and on here, and I apologize, but I always worry that when we hear this has to be done again, then we go way down this path without bringing all of the other things together. So, like, this quote is, faster alone, but further together. So if you target one sole thing that you want to improve, you're going to see a huge gain in that. But then everything else might be left behind. So that's my philosophy in general, which I've talked about on other podcasts, which is this idea of the critical mass system, is that we want to be doing all things all the time with a slight emphasis of one of these things or other things. But we don't want to neglect all of the other aspects of the sport because then you're taking away not only a toolbox item for that athlete in their toolkit, but you're also probably creating a really risky absence of something where they're going to need that and it's not going to be there. And that could create a major problem or a catastrophe somewhere down the line. So we want our athletes to be stronger. We want them to be faster, but we don't want strength to become such a thing that we're chasing those numbers at the detriment of becoming a better soccer player, becoming faster, and being a better overall athlete. And so that's one of the things we have to be very weary of.
Well, your book includes all of it. And again, I want everyone to check it out. It is amazing. And I'm going to include the link to the book in the description below. So please go there. And I also want you guys to follow up with Ryan. So, Ryan, what's the best way for everyone to get in touch with you and hear about what you're doing?
Well, I'm all over social media. Somehow I got verified before Elon Musk started making people pay for it. I didn't get verified on Twitter because I'm just not going to pay for it. But anyway, you can find me on Instagram at ryan.banta, and then you can find me on Twitter at Sprinters Compend. As you can tell, I'm long-winded, and of course, my tag is also long-winded, so it doesn't go all the way through. But if you write in Sprinters Compend or my name, you should be able to find me pretty quickly and easily. I'm also on Facebook, but I'm maxed out there. And I'd be honest with you, I don't spend a lot of time there anymore because it's like my relatives arguing about politics all the time. And I find that to be relatively toxic. So, but yeah, I spend a lot of time on Twitter and Instagram. And I mean, you can find my email. It's rbanta@parkwayschools.net. You guys can email me there too. And, reach out. Don't be a stranger. There's no such thing as a dumb question. There's no such thing as a debate that I'm not willing to have about training. I think that's good too. And, a long time ago, I kind of realized that if I'm going to make an impact anywhere, is just to help people not make the mistakes that I made. So if there's any way that I can truncate the learning curve, I would like to do it. So please reach out, please connect, because I look forward to that. And that's what gets me off the bed every day, and to do my why in the world.
Brilliant. So, everyone, please reach out to Ryan if you have any questions. And we really hope you enjoyed this conversation on speed development and you start to implement some of the things that Ryan talked about today, or maybe you got the book. Feel free to leave a comment below and let us know what you're doing and how your speed is improving. I will see you guys on next week's episode. Ryan, thank you again.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it. It was awesome. Enjoyed the chat.